The Griswolds' disastrous road trip to Walley World is an American comedy classic, but the chaos behind the scenes rivaled anything on screen. From a real dog-dragging incident during filming to a completely scrapped ending that test audiences hated, the production of National Lampoon's Vacation was filled with bizarre twists. Did you know John Candy's iconic role was only added during emergency reshoots, or that the cast vomited repeatedly while filming the finale? Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about National Lampoon's Vacation. Fact 1. The entire ending was reshot, after test audiences hated it. One of the most dramatic behind-the-scenes stories from National Lampoon's Vacation involves a complete overhaul of the film's ending that happened months after principal photography had wrapped. When the movie was first screened for test audiences, director Harold Ramis and the studio discovered that viewers absolutely loved the film right up until the very end, and then their enthusiasm completely collapsed. The problem wasn't with the quality of the acting or the comedy, but rather with what the original ending actually showed, or more specifically, what it didn't show. In the original version that John Hughes wrote, the Griswold family finally arrives at Walley World only to discover it's closed for repairs, which sends Clark Griswold spiraling into a complete breakdown. After buying a realistic-looking BB gun, Clark then purchases a map to the stars' homes and tracks down Roy Walley himself at his Beverly Hills mansion. The ending showed Clark barging through the front gates and finding Walley having a business meeting on his back patio, where Clark then holds everyone at gunpoint and forces them to sing and dance to Marty Moose songs for his family's entertainment. The police eventually arrive to arrest Clark, but in a twist, the mysterious woman in the red Ferrari turns out to be Roy Walley's daughter, and she convinces her father to drop the charges. The fundamental issue with this ending was that after spending the entire movie building up Walley World as the ultimate destination, audiences never actually got to see the family enjoy the theme park. Test audiences felt cheated and frustrated that the payoff they'd been waiting for never materialized. The reaction was so overwhelmingly negative that Warner Brothers gave the production team just 4 days to write and film an entirely new ending. John Hughes was brought back to create the revised conclusion, and filming took place at Six Flags Magic Mountain in Valencia, California, which is where John Candy was cast as security guard Lasky for the new finale. Fact 2. Christy Brinkley revealing she was Wally's daughter. Throughout National Lampoon's Vacation, one of the most memorable running gags involves a mysterious blonde woman played by supermodel Christy Brinkley, who keeps appearing alongside the Griswolds in a red Ferrari, flirting with Clark and driving him to distraction. For the entire movie, her character remains nameless and unexplained, simply appearing and disappearing like a beautiful mirage on the highway. But in the original ending that was filmed and then completely scrapped, audiences would have finally learned exactly who she was and why she kept showing up, and the revelation would have tied directly into the film's climax in a way that completely changed the story. In the version that director Harold Ramis originally shot, after Clark holds Roy Walley and his associates hostage in Walley's backyard and forces them to sing and dance at gunpoint, the police show up to arrest Clark and take him to jail. But just as the officers are about to haul him away, the Ferrari woman suddenly arrives at the scene and reveals herself to be Roy Walley's daughter. She then uses her influence to convince her father to drop all charges against Clark, essentially saving him from going to prison for what he had just done. The scene would have finally explained her mysterious presence throughout the film and given her character an actual purpose beyond just being a temptation for Clark. The ending didn't stop there, though. After Clark is released, the final scene was supposed to show the entire Griswold family on an airplane heading back home to Chicago, all wearing complimentary Walley World hats as souvenirs. But in true Griswold fashion, the family then discovers they've somehow boarded the wrong flight entirely, meaning their vacation chaos would continue even as they tried to return home. None of this footage has ever been officially released, though photographs from the deleted ending appear in the film's credits. and Chevy Chase mentioned on the DVD commentary that he owns a copy of the original cut. Fact 3. John Candy's iconic role was only created for the reshoot. One of the most beloved characters in National Lampoon's Vacation is Russ Lasky, the friendly security guard at Walley World who gets held at gunpoint by a crazed Clark Griswold and ends up taking the family on all the rides. What most fans don't realize is that this character didn't even exist in the original version of the movie that was filmed back in 1982. When the production wrapped and the film was shown to test audiences, people loved almost everything about it except for one major problem: they absolutely hated the ending. In the original conclusion, Clark never actually got to enter Walley World at all. Instead, after discovering the park was closed, he bought a map of celebrity homes, tracked down Roy Walley to his mansion, and held him and his business associates hostage at gunpoint while forcing them to sing and dance for his family's entertainment. While this might sound darkly funny on paper, test audiences were furious because the entire movie had been building up to the family finally reaching Walley World, and they never got to see the park. Director Harold Ramis knew they had a serious problem on their hands, so writer John Hughes was brought back to create an entirely new ending. Warner Brothers gave the cast and crew just 4 days to shoot the new footage, and the revised ending needed a key character who could help the Griswolds actually experience the park. That's when they cast John Candy as Lasky, the good-natured security guard who reluctantly opens up Walley World for the family. The reshoot took place at Six Flags Magic Mountain in Valencia, California, several months after principal photography had finished. Candy's performance became one of the most memorable parts of the entire film, and it's hard to imagine the movie without him, yet his entire role was created purely out of necessity when the original ending failed so spectacularly with audiences. Fact 4. Anthony Michael Hall grew 3 inches during production. One of the most noticeable continuity issues in National Lampoon's Vacation happened completely by accident, and it had nothing to do with props or camera angles. Anthony Michael Hall, who played Rusty Griswold, was only 14 years old when he was cast in the film, and like many teenage boys at that age, he was right in the middle of a major growth spurt. When production began in July of 1982, Hall was roughly the same height as Beverly D'Angelo, who played his mother Ellen. Throughout most of the movie, the two actors appear to be approximately equal in height when they stand next to each other, which makes sense for a teenage son and his adult mother. However, the original ending of the film tested so poorly with audiences that director Harold Ramis and writer John Hughes had to completely rewrite and reshoot the entire finale. Warner Brothers gave the cast and crew just 4 days to shoot the new ending at Six Flags Magic Mountain in California. But this reshoot didn't happen until several months after principal photography had wrapped. During those months between the original filming and the emergency reshoot, Anthony Michael Hall's body kept right on growing. By the time he returned to play Rusty again for the Walley World scenes, he had shot up 3 full inches in height. The result is immediately obvious when you watch the film closely. In the climactic scenes at Walley World, including the moments when the Griswold family rides the roller coasters together, and when they're confronted by security guards, Rusty is suddenly noticeably taller than his mother Ellen. Hall now towers over Beverly D'Angelo in these scenes, creating a jarring visual difference from everything that came before. The production simply had no choice but to film with Hall at his new height, and there was no way to hide or fix the problem in post-production. It remains one of the most visible examples of how the film's troubled ending affected the final product in unexpected ways. Fact 5. The cast vomited, repeatedly filming the Walley World finale. The climactic scenes at Walley World, where the Griswold family finally gets to enjoy the theme park rides, look like pure fun on screen, but filming those sequences was absolutely miserable for everyone involved. The production shot these scenes at Six Flags Magic Mountain in Valencia, California, and director Harold Ramis needed to capture footage from multiple angles to make the sequences work properly. This meant that the cast members had to ride the roller coasters and other intense rides over and over again, and the toll on their bodies was severe. According to the DVD commentary, the cast rode the roller coasters a total of 7 times to get all the necessary shots, and by the end of the day, nearly everyone was physically sick from the constant motion and G-forces. Chevy Chase mentioned in the commentary that many of the rides made him and the other cast members vomit, especially because they had to endure them multiple times for different takes. The experience was particularly brutal for Dana Barron, who played daughter Audrey Griswold. She revealed in the commentary that the coasters made her so sick that she had to take motion sickness pills just to get through the filming. And even with medication, she would pass out on nearby benches between takes, trying to recover. The young actress was only 16 or 17 years old at the time, and the repeated rides took a serious physical toll on her that the crew had to work around throughout the day. Perhaps most interesting is what Anthony Michael Hall shared about his experience filming these scenes. Hall played Rusty Griswold, and in the final film, there are shots of him on the roller coaster where he looks absolutely terrified. As it turns out, Hall wasn't acting at all during those moments. He confirmed in the commentary that in the shots where he looks genuinely scared riding the coaster, his fear was completely real. The combination of having to ride the intense roller coasters 7 times in a row, dealing with the cameras mounted on the rides, and watching his fellow cast members get progressively sicker throughout the day created a genuinely frightening experience for the teenage actor. Fact 6. The dog dragging scene almost happened in real life. One of the darkest and most uncomfortable moments in National Lampoon's Vacation comes when Clark Griswold accidentally leaves Aunt Edna's dog Dinky tied to the back bumper of the family truckster and drives away, dragging the poor animal to its death. It's a shocking scene that walks a fine line between dark comedy and genuine horror, and most viewers assume it was purely a product of John Hughes's twisted imagination. However, director Harold Ramis revealed on Late Night with David Letterman in 1983 that this disturbing scenario almost played out in real life, right in front of the cast and crew during production. Ramis explained to Letterman that the movie was being filmed in Durango, Colorado, and the production team was staying at a Holiday Inn while shooting various scenes in the area. During their time there, someone from the crew witnessed something alarming in the hotel parking lot. A station wagon began pulling out of the Holiday Inn with a dog still tied to its rear bumper, exactly like the scene they had just filmed for the movie. When Letterman asked Ramis if this was just an urban legend or something a friend had told him about, the director insisted it was real, saying, "No, it was definitely a confirmed sighting." The crew members who spotted what was happening immediately rushed to stop the driver before the vehicle could get up to speed on the road. Fortunately, unlike poor Dinky in the film, the real-life dog was saved in time before any harm came to it. Ramis told Letterman that they were able to alert the driver and rescue the animal before tragedy struck. The bizarre coincidence of life imitating art during the actual filming of that very scene added an extra layer of uncomfortable reality to what was already one of the movie's most controversial moments, proving that sometimes truth really is stranger than fiction. Fact 7. 5. Identical trucksters were built and destroyed. The iconic Wagon Queen family truckster that carried the Griswolds across America wasn't just one car, it was actually 5 identical vehicles built specifically for the movie. Production notes from the filming reveal that the crew utilized 5 separate family truckster picture cars throughout the production, and this wasn't just for backup purposes. Each of these 5 cars was based on a 1979 Ford LTD Country Squire station wagon, which the production team then modified with the trademark metallic pea green paint, excessive fake wood paneling, and those ridiculous 8 headlights that made the car look like a rolling joke about American automotive excess from the late 1970s. The reason they needed 5 separate vehicles becomes clear when you think about what happens to the Griswolds' car throughout their disastrous road trip. The truckster gets progressively more beaten up and damaged as the family makes their way from Chicago to California, and the filmmakers wanted to show that deterioration realistically on screen. By rotating between the 5 different cars and allowing each one to be altered and damaged in specific ways, the production team could show the accumulating wear and tear that the vehicle endures throughout the Griswolds' journey. One car might have been used for scenes where the truckster still looked relatively new, while another could be beaten up for the later desert sequences where everything starts falling apart. This approach gave the special effects and stunt teams the freedom to actually damage the vehicles during filming without worrying about ruining their only picture car. They could crash one car, strip parts off another, and keep a third relatively intact for close-up shots, all while maintaining visual continuity throughout the film. The production traveled to more than 90 locations across 5 states during filming, which lasted 55 days, and having multiple versions of the car meant they could accommodate the punishing shooting schedule and all the physical comedy that involved damaging the vehicle in various ways. Fact 8. The truckster was designed by the Batmobile creator, the hideously ugly Wagon Queen family. Truckster that Clark Griswold gets stuck with wasn't just some random station wagon that the production team found sitting on a lot somewhere. It was actually a carefully designed automotive disaster, and the man responsible for creating it was none other than George Barris, the legendary customizer who built the original Batmobile for the 1966 Batman television series. Barris was already famous in Hollywood for transforming ordinary cars into iconic movie vehicles. But with the truckster, he was given a very different assignment: make something that looked absolutely terrible on purpose. Barris started with a 1979 Ford LTD Country Squire station wagon and then went to work making it as ugly and ridiculous as possible. He covered it in what the production called metallic pea paint, a sickly greenish color that nobody in their right mind would ever choose for a real car. Then he added excessive amounts of fake wood paneling, going way beyond what even the gaudiest station wagons of that era would have featured. But perhaps the strangest modification was the headlights. Barris installed 8 headlights total by taking a second pair from another Ford Crown Victoria and mounting them upside down above the original pair, creating a bizarre bug-eyed look that made the car seem even more absurd. The whole point was to create a vehicle that perfectly captured the idea of a sleazy car salesman sticking an unsuspecting customer with the worst possible option. The truckster needed to look like a car that nobody would ever want to drive cross-country, and Barris succeeded completely in that mission. The car also featured other odd details, like a strangely placed fuel filler door and a grill area that was mostly covered by bodywork with only tiny openings near the bumper. Every design choice was intentionally wrong, making the truckster one of the most memorable movie cars ever created, even though it was designed to be completely forgettable and embarrassing. Fact 9. Harold Ramis regretted the East St. Louis scene. One of the most controversial moments in National Lampoon's Vacation involves the Griswold family taking a wrong turn and ending up in a rough neighborhood where their car gets stripped and vandalized while Clark desperately asks locals for directions. Years after the film's release, director Harold Ramis expressed genuine regret about this sequence, calling it the most politically incorrect sequence I've ever shot during the film's DVD commentary. The scene shows the family driving through what appears to be a dangerous urban area, where they're immediately targeted by criminals who steal their hubcaps and strip parts off the family truckster, while the Griswolds are still inside the vehicle, creating an uncomfortable moment that plays on stereotypes about inner-city crime. What makes this situation even more complicated is that the scene contains a significant geographical error that added to the controversy. The film shows a title card that reads East St. Louis, which is actually a separate city located in Illinois, across the river from St. Louis, Missouri. However, Ramis later clarified that the scene was never meant to take place in East St. Louis at all. The family is shown crossing the Poplar Street Bridge, which would place them in downtown St. Louis proper, not in East St. Louis. According to Ramos, a shot featuring an East St. Louis sign was mistakenly included in the final cut of the film, creating confusion about the actual location. This error had real-world consequences, as the scene helped cement East St. Louis's reputation as a dangerous place, even though the filmmakers never intended to depict that specific community. The scene became particularly problematic because East St. Louis, which was already struggling with economic challenges, didn't deserve the negative association that came from being featured in such a degrading sequence. Ramos's later acknowledgement of his regret shows a director recognizing that comedy can sometimes cross lines and cause unintended harm to real communities, especially when geographical mistakes compound the damage by targeting the wrong place entirely. Fact 10. Chevy Chase and James Keach improvised the dead dog scene. One of the darkest comedic moments in National Lampoon's Vacation happens when Clark Griswold gets pulled over by a highway patrol officer who reveals that Dinky, Aunt Edna's dog, has been dragged to death behind the family truckster. What makes this scene even more interesting is that much of the dialogue between Chevy Chase and James Keach, who played the motorcycle cop, was completely improvised on the spot rather than following the script as written. The scene takes place at night on a dark stretch of highway in Colorado, and it's supposed to be a serious moment where the officer confronts Clark about animal cruelty after discovering the dog's leash still attached to the rear bumper of the station wagon. The cop delivers lines like, "Poor little guy, probably kept up with you for a mile or so," while holding up the empty leash as evidence of what happened. What's particularly fascinating about this scene is that if you watch it closely, you can actually see both actors struggling to keep straight faces throughout the entire exchange. Chase and Keach are noticeably trying to stifle their laughter during what's supposed to be a tense confrontation about accidentally killing a pet. The two actors were clearly enjoying themselves so much during the improvisation that they could barely maintain their composure, and director Harold Ramis decided to keep those takes in the final cut of the film, rather than doing additional takes where they might have been more serious. The humor comes from Clark's desperate attempts to lie and cover up what happened when he gets back in the car, trying to convince his family that he was pulled over for something completely different so that Aunt Edna won't find out about her dog's fate. The improvised nature of the scene gave it a spontaneous energy that made the dark comedy work even better than it might have if the actors had stuck rigidly to the scripted dialogue, and their barely contained amusement adds an extra layer of awkward humor to an already uncomfortable situation. Fact 11. Beverly D'Angelo's hairstyle mysteriously changes. If you watch National Lampoon's Vacation closely, you'll notice something strange happens to Ellen Griswold's hair about 3/4 of the way through the movie. Beverly D'Angelo's character starts the film with a soft, wavy hairstyle that she maintains for most of the family's cross-country journey, but then suddenly, and without any explanation, her hair transforms into a much tighter, curlier poodle perm style. The change is most noticeable around the time the family drops off Aunt Edna's body in Phoenix and continues through the rest of the film, including all of the final Walley World sequences. This wasn't some kind of intentional choice to show that Ellen had stopped at a salon during the road trip or anything like that. Instead, it's a visible continuity error that happened because of the complicated production schedule. The reason for this dramatic hair change comes down to timing and the emergency reshoots that had to happen months after the original filming wrapped. When test audiences saw the original ending of the movie and hated it because they never got to see the inside of Walley World, the studio gave director Harold Ramis just 4 days to shoot an entirely new ending. The problem was that this reshoot took place several months after principal photography had finished, and in that time, Beverly D'Angelo had changed her hairstyle. By the time she came back to film the new Walley World scenes with John Candy and the rest of the cast, her hair was completely different from how it looked during the main production. The filmmakers tried to match it as closely as possible, but the difference is still obvious to anyone paying attention. So when you see Ellen with that distinctive poodle perm during the theme park finale, you're actually watching footage that was shot months later than everything that came before it, creating one of the most noticeable continuity mistakes in the entire film. Fact 12. Imogene Coca thought she was too nice to play Aunt Edna. When the producers of National Lampoon's Vacation approached legendary comedienne Imogene Coca to play the role of Aunt Edna, the cranky and irritating backseat driver who makes the Griswolds trip even more miserable, Coca had serious doubts about whether she could pull it off. The problem wasn't that she didn't understand the character or lacked the acting skills to bring Aunt Edna to life, but rather that she genuinely worried she was too nice of a person to convincingly play someone so mean and unpleasant. Coca had built her career on making people laugh through warmth and charm, and the idea of portraying such a nasty, complaining character felt like it might be outside her range. She expressed these concerns to producer Matty Simmons, who had to work to convince her that she was more than capable of taking on the role. Simmons reassured Coca that she was a fantastic actress who could play any role she wanted, regardless of how different it might be from her own personality. He knew that her decades of experience in vaudeville and early television had given her the skills to transform into any character, even one as disagreeable as Aunt Edna. After some convincing, Coca agreed to take the part, and her performance ended up being one of the most memorable aspects of the entire film. Her ability to deliver cutting remarks and constant complaints with perfect comedic timing made Aunt Edna both hilarious and genuinely irritating in exactly the way the character needed to be. Years later, Chevy Chase reflected on working with Coca and shared his own perspective on the situation, describing her as one of the sweetest ladies in the world. The contrast between who Imogene Coca really was as a person and the character she played on screen made her performance all the more impressive, proving that Simmons had been absolutely right to push her to take the role despite her initial hesitation. Fact 13. Stunt coordinator won a 50-foot jump bet. One of the most memorable sequences in National Lampoon's Vacation happens when the Griswold family gets stranded in the desert after their station wagon crashes through a wooden barrier on an unfinished road. The scene required the family truckster to launch off the end of the road and sail through the air before crash landing in the sandy desert below, and the person responsible for pulling off this dangerous stunt was Dick Zeiker, the film's stunt coordinator. But what makes this moment even more interesting is that Zeiker actually made a bet with other crew members before filming the scene, claiming he could make the massive station wagon jump more than 50 feet through the air. Given the size and weight of the vehicle, along with the difficulty of controlling a car mid-flight, many crew members were skeptical that such a jump was even possible, let alone safe to attempt. Despite the doubts from his colleagues, Zeiker was confident in his abilities and went ahead with the stunt. The scene required precise timing and expert driving skills because the car had to launch at exactly the right speed and angle to clear the necessary distance without flipping over or landing in a way that would damage the vehicle beyond what the scene called for. When the cameras rolled and Zeiker sent the truckster flying off the edge of that unfinished desert road, the car soared through the air and landed well past the 50-foot mark, proving that his bold prediction was accurate. Not only did he successfully complete one of the film's most challenging stunts, but he also won the bet against the crew members who had doubted him. The jump remains one of the standout practical effects in the movie, and it was accomplished entirely through old-school stunt work without any digital enhancement or safety nets that modern productions might rely on today. Fact 14. Harold Ramis voiced two characters. Uncredited director. Harold Ramis didn't just sit behind the camera during the making of National Lampoon's Vacation. He also stepped in front of the microphone to voice two small but memorable roles in the film, and he never received on-screen credit for either performance. The Fact 15. The film was written during a Chicago blizzard. The entire story of National Lampoon's Vacation began during one of the worst weather disasters in Chicago history. In January of 1979, writer John Hughes found himself trapped inside his home during a catastrophic blizzard that would eventually dump over 20 inches of snow on the city and shut down the entire region for days. With nothing else to do and nowhere to go, Hughes decided to use the time to work on a short story that had been forming in his mind. The piece he started writing was called Vacation 58, and it was loosely based on a family road trip Hughes had taken as a child when his own parents drove him from Detroit to Disneyland back in 1958. During those snowbound days, Hughes pulled out a Rand McNally road atlas that he kept stored in the trunk of his car and spread it out on his table to help him plot the fictional family's journey from the Midwest all the way to California. Using the atlas as his guide, he carefully traced realistic routes and identified actual towns, landmarks, and stops along the way where his characters could experience various misadventures. This attention to geographic detail helped make the story feel authentic and relatable to anyone who had ever taken a long family road trip across America. Hughes submitted the finished story to National Lampoon magazine, though it ended up being bumped from the initial vacation-themed issue it was supposed to appear in. The story was eventually published in September of 1979, and it caught the attention of Hollywood almost immediately. Warner Brothers optioned the rights to the story as soon as it was published, recognizing that Hughes had captured something universal about the American family vacation experience. That snowbound writing session during the blizzard of '79 would ultimately lead to one of the most successful comedy franchises of the 1980s, proving that sometimes being stuck indoors with nothing but time and a road atlas can produce something truly memorable. First voice role came during one of the movie's most pivotal moments, when the Griswold family finally arrives at Walley World after their disastrous cross-country journey, only to discover that the theme park is closed for repairs. As Clark and his exhausted family stand at the gates in disbelief, they hear a pre-recorded message from the park's mascot, Marty Moose, apologizing for the inconvenience. That cheerful automated voice delivering the devastating news that ruins Clark's dream vacation was actually Ramis himself, adding an extra layer of irony to the scene since the director was essentially crushing his own main character's hopes. The second uncredited voice appearance happens near the end of the film, after Clark has his breakdown and forces security guard Russ Lasky to take the family through the park at gunpoint. When the police arrive and surround the situation, an off-camera officer can be heard asking park owner Roy Walley whether they should take the Griswold family downtown and book them for their crimes. That authoritative police voice also belonged to Ramis, who recorded the line without ever appearing on screen. These kinds of director cameos weren't unusual in Hollywood, and Ramis was known for occasionally inserting himself into his own projects in small ways. But what makes these two performances particularly interesting is that they bookend the film's climactic sequence. His voice first delivers the bad news that sets Clark's final meltdown in motion, and then his voice returns at the resolution to threaten the consequences of Clark's desperate actions, creating an unintentional narrative thread that connects both moments through the director's own vocal presence.